welcome. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the talks at Maison&Objet. Thank you all for coming and giving up part of your weekend to be here. Today's talk is a really exciting one. We are looking at Danish design and the legacy of, the Danish design scene that has transcended before and has really sort of made a lasting impact on the global design scene. You think of designers such as Arne Jacobsen and Hans Wegner and how they've really shaped the design world as we know it today. And we're going to be looking at the contemporary Danish design scene and how that legacy is being honoured and also translated and then reimagined as well for the future. Just to introduce myself, I'm Roddy Clarke, a design journalist, and I'm excited to be joined by a wonderful panel of guests. We've got designer Gesa Hansen, we have architect and designer Thulstrup, and the wonderful design duo Christian and Jade. So we've got a wealth of expertise where we can really dive into this topic. But coming to you first, Gesa, it would be great to sort of hear more about your work and how your creative journey began.
I started together with David at nouveaux. That's how we know each other. And I'm more of a furniture designer, and I'm half Danish, half German. So I think the Danish design became really important to me because I always saw it in a contrast to the German, very strict minimalism. And I think that's how you can see how important it is, because I think Danish design had always a more bigger intention with lights and shadows, while the German design was very strict and a lot of light, just like white light. And I think this is why I escaped into the Scandinavian part of the design world. And I work in Paris as a designer and interior designer, and I do more and more hospitality designs, because I think this is where I think it's the closest to the rituals of a human being, because you have the sleeping place and the eating place, and I love working all these areas.
That's amazing. Obviously, you've got a family heritage of design as well. You've brought your daughter here today, yes. And you were saying how your parents used to do the same. What was your first sort of memories and introduction to design?
Yeah, I was really born into it because my grandfather was a designer, my parents were designers, and they took me to fairs like this, for example, since I was a little kid. And I think they didn't leave me a choice. I really, at one point when I was in puberty, I was saying I would not be a designer, but I think it was just so engraved into my brain. And I think it was interesting because my father was more into metal, even if he was Danish, more into metal and the Bauhaus. And my grandfather was more into classic Scandinavian handcrafted design. And as a child, when you feel how wood is worked and when you see how big machines work metal, I think you're naturally drawn to wood and handcraft because of the smell of the material and because the noise is nicer. And I think that's why I'm so drawn into wood and handcrafted design, more than industrial machine design.
And you lived in France for now 20 years, I think?
Yes.
So obviously living in another country, how do you hold that heritage still very close to the work that you do?
I think it's even more important to identify yourself in your work when you're living in another country, because I knew that my style would never be French, because I tried. I was working for Pierre Frey and I tried a French object, and when they saw it, they were like, it still looks Scandinavian. So I think I just hold on to this heritage, and I think when you're a child, when you're working later, you keep on inspiring yourself with all the memories you had as a child. For me, it's still like this. Like I still remember how it felt like lying on a wooden floor and seeing all these textures. And I think it's important for later. So I think it's just the Scandinavian heritage was not a choice. It's just there.
It's amazing. And David, coming to you, it would be really good to hear about. I mean, you get involved in multiple different projects, and it would be great to hear how it all started for you.
It started for me. I started actually in Paris with an préparatoire, it was called, and I didn't really know what to do, but I always wanted to work with something creative. I thought I was going to be a fashion designer, a furniture designer, an architect, and it was not until sort of like really being in Paris, doing this année préparatoire, that I actually decided to go towards interior. So I applied in the Royal Academy of Architecture in Denmark that has the interior school, and I got accepted there. I did 3 years there, my bachelor, and then I had an exhibition in Paris where I got a possibility to do an internship at Jean Nouvel. So I went, and then I got hired at Jean Nouvel after a few months. Ended up staying almost 4 years and taking leave from my studies, and then basically finalizing my master while working full time at Jean. So that was quite a busy moment of my life. I come from a big family. We lived in a house close to the forest, and it was a wooden house, a very old house. Lot of sort of like, it was very un-Scandinavian, if you could say, sort of like that the typical Scandinavian interior is based on white walls. This was, we had a sort of like a black kitchen, we had wood floors, marble floors, granite floors, wood paneling. So I grew up surrounded by a lot of materiality, and I think that has formed my approach to how I work. Even today, this sense of bringing materiality in, and that we as human beings, wherever we come towards something, we see a tree or we see another building, and I want to bring that feeling with me into the interiors that I'm creating. So this sense of materiality that is immediately around us, that is what I work on and strive to bring into the projects.
And do you think it's that proximity to nature that you had as a child that's really guided you?
I think definitely my childhood home has had a big impact on me, and I didn't realize that until a few years ago. Actually, by chance, I had a puzzled client calling me and said, "Hey, I bought this property up north of Copenhagen, and could you be interested? We need some help because the previous owners kind of like destroyed the house." And I was like, "Okay, let me have a look." I wasn't necessarily sort of like full onto it because it was not to do a whole project. And I was like, okay, let me look at it and organize with one of my, with someone from my team, the address. And then when I got the address going up there, I was like, oh shit, that's my childhood home. Wow. So I actually got to revisit my childhood after I moved out when I was 12. And that was quite funny to be able to go back to something that actually, without you knowing, have had a big impact on your life. So I came up and I saw this house, which it was not a grand house in any way. It was like, a little building there and something grown there and wood there and, like sort of like these small additions gone over time. And it was just it just became so clear to me that is where my love for space and materiality and the intimacy that I have in the projects that I create, because I think Gesa also just mentioned it, I want people to feel good in the spaces that I create. I want people to be tactile with the materiality that we are surrounded. And I think that we as human beings are very sensitive towards whether we are in a plastic universe or whether we are in a universe with raw materials, real materials that you feel a connection with. So that became sort of like aha moment for me, actually.
It's very serendipitous how it's obviously come back into your life to remind you of those sort of the origin of where your love for design began.
Yes.
And when you're starting out as a designer in sort of Scandinavia, do you feel that responsibility to honor and respect the legacy that's gone before?
I feel a responsibility. I don't feel a pressure. But when I did my studies, I remember feeling a massive pressure because it was all around us, this feeling of, oh, we have to create something new. Oh, we are burdened by this legacy around us because we have to challenge it. It's the old masters. We have to do something new. We have to challenge it, and we have to try things. And today I don't try to create something new for the sake of newness. Today I feel very rested in my approach toward whether it's design or whether it's interior or architecture. And I'm very proud of the legacy because I use it all the time. I look back on architecture from the 20s by Danish architects. I look back on furniture design from the 40s, and I find inspiration in that. But I also look back to, if it could be a furniture from 1788, such as we're working in a building which is a heritage building at the moment. And of course, a part of my research in every project is to dive into what was there before and how can I create an outset that is present today.
Amazing. And it's just, yeah, I think it's seeing how the design world is transitioning so seamlessly, whilst, respecting what has gone before at the same time is really interesting. And coming on to you, Christian and Jade, it'd be really good to hear how it all started for you.
It actually started 10 years ago when Jade and we both studied at the Design Academy Eindhoven in Holland. We were in the same class and were naturally really drawn to each other because we shared a similar way of thinking, a similar aesthetic, and we were both really good at one part of the design process, where Jade was really good at forming concept and narratives, and I was maybe better at translating those narratives into tangible objects and vessels that could contain these narratives. And I feel like then we formed an alliance, and we just continued working together throughout our whole study, and then it became really natural for us to just continue working together after we finished graduating. And now we have the little facet on that we became a couple as well. So now it's even stronger alliance. Yeah.
It's a lovely story. And if you could give us an insight into some of the projects that you've recently got involved in as well.
Yeah, so we call our studio Christian and Jade after our names. And our design studio focuses on designing, making, and developing limited small quantities of products that we make ourselves in Copenhagen. We are very interested in materials and making. We're interested in where materials come from, how they have been shaped, and how we can find our own language within it. So that means that we're often moving towards a monomateriality or a singular material where we really dive into it and investigate how we can learn about it, how we can explore it, and how we can look at different forms in which we can understand accommodating it into the works we do.
And obviously with, Danish design, sort of timber is obviously a material that's used a lot, but you work with a lot of different materials. And are you seeing that more and more in the Danish design world, the variety of materials that are being used?
I do think that wood is like a building block or like a primer material. And I think that what I'm seeing is that maybe there is that it's opening up to more underutilized wood species, that people are getting more interested in, okay, how can we promote, for example, Danish beech wood, which has been very underutilized and just exported away, even though there's such an abundance of it in Denmark, but it has sort of gotten this, it hasn't been very well branded recently, I think, you could say. But also like an interesting Scandinavian company like Varni that is rebranding Finnish Scotch pine. It's also very interesting how we are getting more as a furniture wood, because it's not so normal to use pine as a furniture wood. But I do think that wood is not disappearing, but definitely there are an interest for other materials.
And I think that's also a growing focus on people looking locally at what resources are available, and not just natural resources, but maybe also what is waste material, and looking at how that can be accommodated into projects and design. And that's definitely why I think there will be a growing shift in the material options in the landscape. Yeah.
That's really interesting. And Gesa, obviously, in your experience, how have you sort of seen the Danish design scene adapt and evolve and change over years? Obviously, we're talking about waste and responding to, the issues that we're facing around maybe sustainability and things like that.
I think in wood terms, that's what you already said, but it's definitely going to a little bit away from oak, because oak is becoming less and less ecological, because it's used too much, and it's even exported. But I think it's different wood kinds. But I think your chandelier, how is it called? Reflecting flame, is such a good example of how Danish design could look in the future, because it has this poetry and the ritual of the chandelier. What is the word in English? Chandelier.
Wall scone?
The candle holder? Yeah, candle holder. Because it's really an object that you can find in old houses in Denmark, but in a different material. And they exported it into a new material, into this aluminium, which is really rarely used, I would say, now in the traditional Danish design. And it makes it look so, it's for me, it was pure poetry and like taking an old Danish classical idea to a new standard in a very almost futuristic, I get again goosebumps, I have to stop this, in a very future way. So I think this, just if you take this object, if you go to the hall, to the booth of Christian and Jade and you see it, for me it's the object that translates the new Danish design with the ritual of the lighting as well, because light is very important in Denmark.
I'd love you to expand on that, actually, because that's something we've spoken about before, is the ritual of light and the way that Danish interiors respond really well to natural light. If you could sort of, delve into that and how that's kind of shaped interiors.
Yeah, for me, that was one of the most important contrasts to German minimalism design, because in Denmark, I think you agree with me on this, David, they really have this play of shadow and light and creating intimacy. Also with the whole lighting design of Louis Paulsen, you never really see the light. It's always just transcending through different layers of materiality. And it's such a different use of light. And this to have this brave use of shadows and light in a contrast towards each other is so important. It's a little bit like the images of Wilhelm Hammershøi, where you can really see the light. It's just it's a different use, and it's not to be afraid of shadows, I would say, and darkness. And I think David is using that a lot in his interior design as well. The use of intimacy through dimmed lighting and shadows.
Yeah, do you want to expand on that, actually, and how you incorporate that into your work?
I think, we've grown up with that. There's a massive difference from June to December. In June we have light until 11 o'clock. It gets up at 3 o'clock. In the winter it gets dark at 4 and it gets up at 8:30 or something like that. So I think we're so used to light and shadow as a natural part of the rhythm of Earth. That's one thing. And then secondly, I think we also have, still in Copenhagen, you have an underlit city. So the city life is very underlit, and that is actually because we want to preserve this sense of what we call it dystert, like a little bit sort of like something a little bit both melancholic, but also a little bit sort of like ambivalent. It's not about lighting up everything. We want to actually walk around and feel a little bit sort of like that we can walk towards light. And I think that's what we live our life with. Like my favorite period of the year is coming up now. I'm a winter kid, so I absolutely love the darkness. And I start buying like 300 candles that come in 4 boxes like this, because I know that I use 7 or 8 every day. And it's the first thing I do when I get up, and it's the last thing I do when I go to bed, is blowing out a candle. So I use that also, of course, how I work with lighting schemes in projects in interior, because we have 2 parts. We have natural light and we have artificial light, and we have to make those two make a perfect balance throughout all sceneries of the year. So I'm very focused on how natural light and artificial light work together, how we create openings in buildings, and how we actually also not overlight the interiors that I work with.
And there seems to be this huge sort of emphasis on function, really, more so than, trends and passing trends and fashions that we see often in, maybe other countries, because of this sort of, play with light, I guess. Is it more about function and sort of creating that atmosphere? Like
we have this, form and function follows each other. That's kind of like the ground principles of Scandinavian design, that we don't kind of like create. We don't need to create the extraordinary shapes. We create simplicity. At least that's what I strive to do. So it's very much about creating objects or interiors that, has the necessary. We come from a society where we feel very equal. We don't really have a big elite. So I think the social aspect of how we've grown up, going all the way back to the 40s, where FDB, which is a Danish company created in 42, where Mogensen was the art director, that was about furniture for everybody. And I think that we have this we create from a palette of striving towards simplicity with good materials.
Amazing. And being sort of new and sort of emerging, I mean, you're still quite a young studio. Coming into the Danish design scene, how have you found it sort of with working with more established designers, more established brands? Have you found it open and receptive to collaboration?
Yes, I really find the industry very open, and we have been, I think a lot of the established brands are looking for new ways and new formats of working together with young designers. And I think an example for me and Jade was that 2 years ago we reached out to the Danish wooden company called Danish, that is a flooring company that is very renowned. And we reached out to them because we were curious if we could, together with them, explore this idea of how wood has different densities and what it means. What story does it tell about each character of the trees? Where do they grow? And what do they weigh? And how can we use that as a design tool? So we reached out to Danish, and just 2 days after, we were sitting on a cafe talking about how could we make this project together. And it didn't have like an immediate financial outcome for them or like became a new product they could sell, but they were super interested in our way of thinking and how we could sort of translate their brand and help them to communicate their brand identity through the story that we could make with them.
And we also feel like this way of working is growing more and more in Denmark, where there is a lot of historical brands we see trying to work together with new creatives and designers on more unique one-off projects that are not focused on financial outcomes, but more on how they can tell the story or really showcase the craft and the knowledge that they have gathered over the years. And I just think that that's super exciting because you get a creative output that is just something that you don't necessarily get the opportunity both as a designer or maybe a more established company to really like realize. Yeah.
But I also think that we are really experiencing this like positive openness and collaborative approach with architecture companies from Denmark that are reaching out to us and are interested in implementing bespoke pieces into their projects that doesn't necessarily have a historical brand related to it. And they're just open for working with independent design studios.
That's really, really nice to hear. And do you think that is sort of really where the future lies in capturing their sort of knowledge and heritage and partnering with those, that's where the magic lies, isn't it? Transcending across eras.
Yeah, in some way I feel like the established Danish brands has a very heavy backpack of good design, and in that way it also makes them maybe more open to, if you have a very good backpack of solid products that are keeping to sell and are timeless, then you are maybe also more open of doing something a bit unexpected at the moment, I think.
And in terms of aesthetics, so obviously with Danish design, we often think of, things that are quite simplistic, quite minimal. And I think also with sort of timber, we often have this idea of what perfection might look like in a product. Do you think that's changing? This is a question to all of you, really. Do you think that's changing as we become more educated about the materials that we use, about the way that we're being resourceful, when we look at values of circularity? Do you think that is changing and therefore impacting the aesthetic?
If I can answer, I think definitely. I think that we, when creating a new product today, we have to think so much about production, so much about flat pack, CO2 print, and also this simply. How do we dismantle it afterwards? So monomateriality, that is, I think, a part that all of us are working with. Is also a part of how we create objects that is answering better and better to the sustainable agenda that we have to really work towards very fast. So I think that technology and the agenda is helping us to shape, and I think that's where the heritage that we have with us. There's an interesting mix between those.
Yeah, I also think if you're looking at a company like Architecte, for example, they just relaunched a really famous Architecte stool together with former Phantasma, where they have been working on a project where they have tried to actually educate about how the I think it's birch wood doesn't actually come in such clean pieces without nuts, but now they are launching the stool with the nuts again and showcasing the beauty of that, and in some way changing what do we perceive as perfection or
that project is fascinating. It's the Forest collection, I think, and they've sort of photographed it with magnifying glasses over the knots to sort of really amplify those sort of natural imperfections. But you were going to add to the...
Yeah, it's just, I think what I was just thinking, what was also typical Danish or Scandinavian for me, and in contrast, because I always see through my, since I'm half German, half Danish, in the contrast to German design was the acceptance of patina, of, how do you say patina? It's patina, no? Which I see a lot in your work, too. But I think the Danish design has always accepted patina, while other designs try to look always the same and never get a scratch. And I think this acceptance of imperfection of the material, and to really own the material, and to let the material grow old, and that is even more beautiful when it's grown old and patinated. That's something that I think is really important, and that's why the materiality is so important for Danish designers, because they really they accept the material as it is. It doesn't have to stay like a Californian Botoxed woman, like some of the in a former time the Vitra chairs were not aging anymore. Now they are, but there was a time where the leather was made in a certain way so that they would never age, because the guys who bought them were saying the leather is aging. And I think this acceptance of imperfection and aging has always been in the Scandinavian tradition something that was accepted and even celebrated.
I also agree, and I also think there's an acceptance of materials being a living thing, like a living material. That, for example, like a wood, it continues to live even after it's been harvested. So like it continues to expand and contract in the home, it continues to change color, it continues to crack. And I think that this idea of materials and resources that we extract from the earth is something that's becoming more and more prevalent in how we design today.
I think that's something I've always really admired about Danish design is actually how you live with objects and continue to sort of grow with them, and there is that sense of timelessness, that that longevity. And are you seeing things like repair and the modularity of items that's just becoming more commonplace?
I think I'm an interior designer as a base, and when I grew up, the term interior architect didn't exist. It's a very new thing, actually. Like it was architects that did everything. And then now we have designers, industrial designers, interior architects. And we grew up in Denmark with sort of like everybody can actually be a little bit of an interior architect. Everybody has a good selection of furnitures that inherited a little bit from their parents and this one. So they have over years kind of like created a really good furniture base for their home. So they need, because it's all sort of like going into to heritage, the furnitures. And therefore we have more and more, I see it more and more, there's more people and smaller companies that are doing the weaves, that you can go down and get your furniture re-lacquered, like the strings made in leather, like basically that didn't really exist so much 10 years ago. So in 10, 15 years, we have really seen a massive growth of smaller companies that are looking to preserve and work with all the furnitures. And we just didn't have that either.
And is it an appreciation for craft, do you think, that you're seeing more and more?
Definitely. We have great craftsmanships. We want to revitalize that. And it exists a lot in Denmark. And we definitely will see more of that. But basically also because we want the furniture to last and we want to be able to repair them. So, and we didn't think necessarily like that 10 years ago.
And in terms of sort of gaining more accessibility into sort of the Danish design world, I guess, how do you feel it could become more sort of democratic and accessible, especially maybe from a price point perspective? Because, things are, we're going through sort of, difficult times when it comes to cost of living and things. Do you think it's more about the education of how we're sort of investing into pieces and living with them? And again, this mindset of repair?
I think it is. I think, for example, there's a lot of vintage furniture that is not that expensive and that is still in a very good shape for even people who don't want to invest so much. But I think the heritage of Scandinavian furniture and Scandinavian families is a big thing, no? Because I have still so many pieces and they just last. And they are still the same, just the wood has changed a little bit or got softer, but I think to inherit furniture, that's definitely a thing. And I think the vintage furniture is not expensive. And I think there are a lot of brands. Not all Scandinavian brands are responsible. I think that's something that people have to watch out for. I think it's better to buy a vintage furniture in an ecological way than to buy Scandinavian design furniture that has been produced in a country far away. And vintage furniture will always be less expensive than a new one. There's so many that have not been discovered yet, which have it's really good way.
When you think of mid-century Danish design and how, on sort of vintage platforms, there is a wealth of abundance there. And that's a great sort of, entry point for people to start with, isn't it?
Yes, totally. I agree.
Going to add to that?
Yeah, Christian and I have also been actually talking a lot about this idea of what democratic design is, because I feel like Danish design was founded a lot on this idea of people being able to access the furniture, being able to afford them. But what exactly that means today, we've been questioning a lot if this idea of low price accessibility to everyone is truly democratic, or if we need to extend or expand the idea of democracy throughout maybe the entire supply chain, like to the person who is harvesting it, who is producing it, who is shipping it. And if this is maybe an idea of like when you say education of what democratic really is, and if this shift of mindset is what can be part of the idea of people understanding price and price points and stuff like that.
Yes, I think so too, because I think also you, if you buy a real piece that has been shaped in a certain material which comes from local productions, and you also buy the worth of the object in a way. I think it's getting more and more expensive with its story, in a way, like the candle holder. But I really think that to believe in the living material and into the story of an object is as important as the object itself.
And as the narrative that you're sort of investing into as well behind the piece, which then injects personality into the space, and there's something beautiful that comes from it that radiates within the spaces that you put these products in, which you see often in Danish interiors. I think I'd love to ask all of you sort of individually what your vision for, or what you think the future of Danish design really is when we think about all of the global pressures that we're facing and the role of AI and technology. What do you think the next 5 to 10 years looks like for Danish design? And even beyond, even. Big question, but if you can summarize it, each of you, it'll be really interesting to hear.
It's funny because we hear a lot about AI, and I think it's super interesting. We in the studio has also looked into how we could utilize it in some way. But when it comes down to it, it comes down to the thought, like the human thought and how, which philosophy and approach we have as human creatives. And I think that we have to stick really true to that and use, of course, AI to the things that can make things easier, repetition work and so on like that. So that's one thing. Secondly, I think that we definitely with the sustainable agenda, like in 2030, we in Denmark are going to put in a new set of rules for how to build houses. It will massively change how we actually look at architecture today. And we have 6 years to adapt. So we're super busy because we won't be able to build a house like we do it today in 6 years. And that forces us to think in a different way. It forces us to look differently at materiality. And I hope that, of course, the same thing will happen with product design. You know, that one thing is that it's actually not necessarily the governments, but it's actually the brands that really actually are pushing this agenda a lot. Not necessarily either the consumer. There's a few consumers that are pushing for it, but there's still a massive amount of consumers that actually really don't care. And that's really sad. So it is the brands, and it's the brands like Danish, for instance, you know, that has a mindset that they want to make a difference, that will push this agenda forward. So I think we're going to see a lot from the companies that have put sustainability forward in the next 10 years. And we have to, as designers, adapt to how we create from that basis.
Yeah, amazing. It's good to know that legislation's on its way as well, because that's, you know, that's always the driver, isn't it? There's no choice then. You have to change. And Christian?
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to see into the future, but of course, as a person that is making things myself, I hope that there will be, of course, a larger focus on maybe bridging the gap between the craft and technology, and not being so scared of communicating what it is you do, like not hiding, because a lot of the things that is being produced today is like handmade. It's like, or like, oh my God, I don't know where I'm going with this actually, sorry. But yeah, I hope to see more signs of hands and what we are doing. Yeah.
Jade?
I think that there is a growing awareness, like with my peers, for example, like the designers that we have friends who are also working in a similar way as us, with a greater consciousness to the reason as to why we create. There is more a desire to always contextualize ourselves within larger narratives and within the changes in the world today. And I do see that happening a lot. And I do think that that would be a good way forward if people are more aware of where things come from, how they're made, why they're made. And I think that that would be good for both creative and audience to rethink the way in which we choose to live and we choose to consume.
Having a real strong sense of purpose, you know. And I'm seeing that more and more, actually, especially with emerging designers coming up. They're just, you know, coming up with such a strong sense of purpose, a real optimism in the work that they're doing, and a sense of change, which is really lovely to see. Gesa?
Yeah, I would say there are always these contrasts between, because there's on the one hand this very technologic, like you said, with AI, and the world is getting faster and faster and more, how do you say that in English, like more technologically controlled in a way.
Yeah.
And I think as the counter contrast, there's more and more people who want to have things that have grown naturally and which are authentic, and which make you feel like you kind of get back roots into the earth. I think there are always this very technique way of seeing it, and then there's always the counterposition of natural things and getting back to nature. And I think that will help the awareness as well. Like, as we see that we are destroying more and more the planet. So, I mean, I think this is why little makers can have productions now, because people get more and more interested in buying pieces that have a character and that have been thought from the first moment to the last moment. Because that's also, it's something that I worked when I was living in Japan. And I think Japanese design and Scandinavian design has some tendencies which are the same, in craftsmanship especially. Because when an object was made from the first point to the last point in an eternal repetition, it's much more interesting in the craftsmanship than when you see, for example, Russian craftsmanship that was like in different sections and people lost the purpose of the object. So these small maker kind of editions, I think they will become more and more important. And I think there's more and more going to be people who will buy them. So I think it's a big chance as well.
Yeah, lots of opportunity. And I think you're right what you said about that connection to nature as the world speeds up, as things get a bit more uncertain. We all are craving that, you know, that grounded sort of stability that we find in nature. And that's what I feel often when I'm traveling through Scandinavia in the interiors that I'm in, is that sense of being grounded, which is lovely. But I'd love to open up to the audience. We've been talking for a while, so it'd be great to hear from some of you. If you've got any questions, we've probably got time for 1 or 2 questions. So please don't be shy. There is a mic, so pop your hand up and we will bring it over to you. Someone has to be first as well. There must be at least 1 or 2 questions in the audience. You've got a wealth of talent sitting here. Come on, use this opportunity. Don't be shy.
Okay, I'm just interested from perhaps the point of view of textiles and perhaps even biomaterials or authentic Danish materials, where you think the possibilities are.
Who wants to take this one?
Silence.
David? Yeah, about textiles and biomaterials and authentic Danish materials and where the opportunities are with those. Your mic.
No, yes. Yes, but I think what I see from the outside of Scandinavian design is they have this huge use of natural textiles, like also like leather. There's this new brand who became really big with Scandinavian leather. I forgot Sørensen. Yeah, and I think there's always been a really good heritage in textiles with Marimekko. And I also feel there are prints for me that are typical Scandinavian in a way. So it definitely has this heritage, and I think it's still going on. No, like there are these motifs that you find only in Scandinavia in a way. Very brave, very colorful, much more colorful than in Germany.
I think Kvadrat is really pushing the sort of the boundaries of, or like pushing the agenda for textile in Scandinavia at least, and they have so many different sub-brands, and they are really pushing how we can produce fabrics from waste textile or from plastic waste, and I think they are really doing it in a very interesting way because they are really doing it on a very large scale and really in that way making a change.
Like we use a lot of like seaweed. Actually, so we're just doing a very large project. I think we're using, I can't remember the square meters, but it's like 600 square meters of seaweed panels. And it's like basically just pulled out of the beach in Denmark. And then it's being dried and compressed, and it lies on the fields. And we use it in a few projects, actually. And I think that's quite interesting to be able to use something that has been benefits as a material. I did a project a few years ago with it, and I kept using it ever since. We use a lot of hemp, a lot of wool, and of course leather and wood, metals, stones. When we do projects, for instance, when we source stones, we source this very often very near to where we're doing the projects. So I would never use an Italian marble in a project in Denmark. I would find a Nordic marble, and that means that it also influenced the aesthetic of the projects.
The sense gives you that sense of locality as well, doesn't it, in every
very much
project? Yeah. I think we've got time for maybe one more question. If there's anyone else bursting to ask a question. If not, I'm sure there will be... Oh, there's one at the back. That's there.
I have a question because you said before that, for example, at a point you were working in Paris and you were designing and trying to adapt to the Parisian style, for example, but you still were using a lot of the Danish style. So I was wondering how you combine different styles with the Danish one as well in your designs.
In interior design, I think Danish design is perfect to be combined with everything, because since it's always in primary materials like wood or leather or wool, you can mix it easily. Like it's really easy to mix. I'm thinking if I have done a very French interior with Scandinavian pieces. Yes, I have done an apartment. where I put Scandinavian pieces in and you wouldn't recognize them anymore. So it's really easy to mix, but it's more about the ability, and I think you have that too. Even when we try to do something not Scandinavian, at the end it seems Scandinavian anyway. I would like to be able to design in different styles, and even like I love the Mexican design style, but I would never be able to have this handwriting. It's like a handwriting, I think.
Amazing, thank you. Unfortunately, I think that's all we've got time for today. But I don't know about you, but I feel very optimistic that Danish design is in the future of Danish design is in very good hands. So thank you all for coming. Thank you to the panel for your amazing insight, and yeah, have a wonderful rest of the weekend.